Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Our top story today, the government has taken what is being described as a major step in developing a new immigration policy. Home Secretary Amber Rudd is asking independent migration experts to analyse the role of EU nationals who are living and working in the UK. They're going to report back next September. That's 6 months before the UK's deadline to leave the European Union. However, some critics say the study has been commissioned too late. Let's speak to our political guru Norman Smith, who's at Westminster for us. So Norman, just explain first of all, what exactly is the government doing?
Well, here we are, a year or so on from the referendum, and the government have decided they need to get a grip on the sort of contribution that EU nationals maybe make to our economy, where they work, what sort of role they play, how certain industries may depend on them, whether different parts of the country have a greater need for them, where there are labour shortages, to get a sort of big picture on how much we need EU nationals, and from that to come up with a sort of strategy for our new immigration system when we leave the EU. Now, what is significant about this is the way the Home Secretary Amber Rudd today has really pretty much said to business, look, I know you're worried, I know you've got concerns, I hear you, just come and tell me what you're worried about. That, of course, has led to fears among some Leave campaigners that this commission, this report, is just going to be a way of the government climbing down on tough immigration curbs. They'll be able to brandish this report and say, look, business is very, very worried about this, not sure we can impose quite as tight curbs as people might like. Well, this morning the Immigration Minister, Brandon Lewis, firmly sought to quash that idea, insisting that when we leave the EU in March 2019, that'll be the end of freedom of movement, and the public will have a clear idea of the new immigration rules. Just have a listen to what he said.
We're very clear about this, as is the Home Secretary as well in her notes that she's outlined to the Commission. Free movement ends when we leave the European Union. But we've also always been very clear about having a smooth process that ensures that our economy continues to prosper. We're seeing jobs grow, more businesses investing here. We want to see that continue. And the Commission's work will help inform what industry and sectors need within the new structure of immigration as we go forward.
Now, what is interesting, what both Mr. Lewis and the Home Secretary Amber Rudd are saying, is that when we leave in March 2019, that doesn't mean bang, the new system starts then. It will be phased in gradually, and we don't know how long that process may be. It could stretch, some have suggested, up to 4 years, and experts are saying getting a new visa system in place, if that's what the government goes for, getting the new resources in place, that could take years. So actually getting the new immigration system, although we might know what it looks like in March 2019, might not actually come into force for some years after that.
Norman, as I said earlier on, it's over a year since the Brexit vote. Why is the government only doing this now? Why has it taken so long?
I think that's, a very good point to which there is no clear answer. Their, I suppose, case would be that only now are they going to introduce the immigration bill, the Brexit immigration bill, and given the sort of feedback they've had from business, they want business to have more input into that legislation. But it's all a bit higgledy-piggledy, you have to say, because the new immigration bill will be introduced at the start of next year. This commission isn't going to report till near the end of next year, towards September. So it all seems just a little bit out of sequence. Nevertheless, they insist business will have an input into this legislation.
Norman Smith, good to speak to you as ever, live from Westminster.
Now, the Home Secretary Amber Rudd sought to reassure business today that there'd be no migration cliff edge when Britain leaves the European Union. Her remarks came as ministers launched a study of how EU nationals contribute to the UK economy. But it won't report until autumn 2018, leading to strong criticism from Labour. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, John Pienaar.
How do you tailor a new immigration policy for Britain after Brexit? Cut to leave more jobs for homegrown workers, maybe less for EU migrants. Ask around at this garment factory in North London and the answer is be careful.
We have 10 different nationalities that are here in our factory, and 80% of those are from the EU. They're not taking away the jobs from the British public because the British public at the moment can't do those skills. So pre-Brexit or post-Brexit doesn't matter. We need our European workers here.
Today, Britain's border force has been on show. Soon, they'll enforce a new immigration system. And the Home Secretary has announced a major study to help decide where Britain needs migrants and who should be stopped when the UK leaves the European Union.
We are leaving the EU, we will be having a new policy, but part of what I'm announcing today is to show that we're going to make sure that it's evidence-based and that we're going to make sure that it works for the whole country.
It'll take years before homegrown British workers can take on or want many of the jobs that are now filled by Europeans. Free movement of EU citizens ends technically in 2 years when Britain leaves. It may continue for a period after that of maybe 2 years during a transition. Ministers haven't decided. They don't all agree, and that's causing confusion. When they do, they'll take that plan to the Brexit negotiations, where they're after the trade deal ministers want so badly. But migration's a sensitive subject. On almost any street, almost anywhere, there's pressure to get on with cutting migrant numbers. What's your view when it comes to Europe and British jobs?
Well, we need work for British people. I think the sooner we get out, the better, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Is it taking too long?
I think they're going to drag it out as long as possible, aren't they? Hoping everybody change their mind.
I think we should train our own people up, people who are living here. We've got 67 million, whatever it is, who live here. I'm sure we can train people up.
Boris Johnson's in Australia talking up a future trade deal. Critics say ministers have been too slow working out an immigration policy. He says migration can be good for the UK.
That doesn't mean that you can't control it. That's all that I think people want to see. They want to see their politicians taking responsibility, explaining the policy, explaining what they're trying to do, explaining who can come in on what basis and why it's good for the economy.
Well, it's completely ridiculous that it has taken them 13 months to commission this basic evidence. We on the Select Committee were asking some of these basic questions back in January. The government should have commissioned this long time ago.
So, work's in progress on a new way to manage migration. One ministers agree should keep firms like this one supplied with the workers it needs. But crafting that policy has only just started. Expect more political wrangling before the job's done. John Pienaar, BBC News.
Now, the clock is relentlessly ticking, but as the Brexit negotiations continue, there's already talk of delay. Europe's Brexit negotiator thinks the start of the main talks could now be postponed by another 2 months, apparently, say reports, because of Britain's lack of progress on agreeing the divorce bill. Also today, the Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, announced a detailed study into how EU migration affects the UK's economy. But that won't be ready until 6 months before the Brexit deadline. Our reporter Fatima Manji is in Westminster. Fatima.
John, the talks over Brexit are faltering. They are not making as much progress as they should have. That's the view of the EU's top negotiator, Michel Barnier. Now, the idea was that by October, the issues of Britain's divorce bill, i.e. how much we should pay for leaving the European Union, the issue of citizens' rights and the issue of the border on Northern Ireland would be resolved, and we would then move on to talks over trade. However, they feel that's not going to happen. Here in London, however, the Brexit department is downplaying the talk from Brussels, saying that actually we're on schedule, talks are going rather well. So make of that what you will, but an EU official has told us today very clearly the UK needs to define its position. If it doesn't happen, there will be no progress.
And the government's confirmed that freedom of movement is going to end with Brexit. Bang.
That's right. March 2019, a new immigration system will come into place in Britain. What that immigration system looks like, well, I think it's fair to say it's a work in progress. The Home Secretary has announced today a detailed analysis of the EU citizens' role in the UK economy and society. That will be conducted by the Migration Advisory Committee. Amber Rudd was on a visit to the west coast of Scotland today, inspecting a Border Force boat patrol. And she's quite clearly said that the report will look into how much immigration various regions and industries need. But crucially, this report will only come into place 6 months before Brexit is due to happen. And the timing of the report is actually causing some concern.
I think it's frankly flabbergasting that the government didn't commission these basic evidence 13 months ago, and I can only assume that's either incompetence or internal divisions that have prevented them doing so. But of course this will have a knock-on impact on the timetable for agreeing new policies as well, because Parliament is going to have to consider this evidence.
Now, the Home Secretary has assured businesses and European citizens that there will be no falling off a cliff edge. That suggests a transitional period for immigration. What that transition looks like, well, we're still to receive clarity.
Fatima Manji in Westminster.
The Home Secretary, safely on a boat on the west coast of Scotland, broke her silence on Brexit in an article in the FT this morning to announce that there will be no cliff edge for EU nationals in March 2019, but rather a transition period of indeterminate length, and that she asked experts of the Migration Advisory Council to examine the costs and benefits of EU migration and report by September next year. Her Immigration Minister, Brandon Lewis, then appeared on the Today programme this morning, taking a different, sharper tone. Free movement will end, he said, when we leave the EU. Then she talked to him during the day. I wonder if that was a rather uncomfortable call. Our policy editor, Chris Cook, explains what today really means.
Immigration was a major issue in the referendum argument.
Absolutely no control over huge numbers of people coming from the EU.
Vote leave and to take back control.
Is it not time we took back control?
Take back control. Take back control. Control our borders and ultimately control our immigration policies too.
That's why the government committed to making an end to free movement a red line in our EU negotiation. Today, the Home Secretary asked the MAC, the Migration Advisory Committee, to start work on what comes next.
We want a new, informed, evidence-based EU migration policy. We've commissioned the MAC to deliver on that, an independent group that they will be consulting with business.
The Home Secretary also set out a vague timetable. Well, sort of. She set out that there will be 3 phases. The first phase will end on what they now call the specified date. That's probably going to end up being the day we leave the EU, probably March 2019. EU citizens who are already here, who have 5 years residency, will be able to apply for a settled status, and those with fewer than 5 years residency will be allowed to stay to clock up those 5 years.
Even with the apparently simple thing of what to do about EU citizens here already, there are all sorts of issues, and notably, just to take the big one, the European Union wants its own court to have some sort of jurisdiction over these people to make sure that their rights are respected, and that, of course, is something the government doesn't like at all.
The second phase is a slightly woolly transition phase, when it seems EU residents will still be able to come here, but will need to register, and they may have weaker rights than earlier EU arrivers enjoy. The idea here, the Home Office says, is to avoid a cliff edge in the labour market when Brexit arrives. And if we allow EU citizens in during transition, maybe we can keep the benefits of the single market then as well.
I think the transition proposal makes absolute sense for us, in the sense that you can see the logic in delaying the moment when we leave the single market and we leave the customs union, if indeed we do. The problem is it might not make sense for the European Union, because what they're hearing over there already is we're ending free movement, and there's no reason they're going to say to us, that's fine, you end free movement but keep all the economic benefits of the market.
Then there will be the final migration system after the transition process ends. Now that could be anything, from basically keeping things as they are for EU citizens, or just treating EU migrants like other migrants. That's a much more burdensome and often rather capricious process.
For non-EU nationals, the current UK immigration regime is really very prescriptive. So for example, if you are coming across as a sponsored worker, you can only come in for a role that requires degree level education. There are very prescriptive salary thresholds. So if you're being transferred by an international company, the absolute minimum you can be paid is £41,500 per annum. Enormous government fees that have to be paid by the employer and the employee. So £16,000 in government fees alone if you want to bring a family of 5 across for 5 years.
To work out what comes next, we'll need to answer questions about who we want coming here. this Slough-based employment agency is worried about prioritising skilled workers.
The majority of the workers that we provide, hundreds of workers we send out to work on a daily basis, are working in the alimentary sector. They're blue-collar workers, and I don't think a point-based system is the right kind of approach to continue to attract that kind of labour for the UK market. The point-based system might cater for highly skilled migrants, but it certainly would not recognise, at least in my experience, the people with the low skill base that this country so much needs.
He's certainly not the only businessman lobbying.
We've had everything from people saying they need barista visas in the future to banks talking about contingency planning and possibly moving their headquarters elsewhere.
Disputes on this theme are rumbling along in government. Keeping business happy overall while meeting the 100,000 net migration target may prove impossible. You can't take control of everything.
Chris Cook, well, why has the commissioning of the report by the Migration Advisory Council, accompanied by a 6-page letter setting out a 3-phase transition period for EU nationals living and working in the UK, caused such a degree of confusion? If the transition lasts for years and EU workers are merely registered as being in the UK, does that constitute the end of freedom of movement on March 2019 or not? Earlier, I spoke to the Immigration Minister, Brandon Lewis. I started by asking why the report wasn't commissioned a year and a month ago, straight after the Brexit vote.
We've commissioned today, and that work with the Migration Advisory Committee will start, and they will also be giving us interim reports as well. Later this year, I'll be publishing a white paper to outline the broad approach to immigration post when we leave the European Union. And in early 2018, we'll bring before Parliament, as we said in the Queen's speech, an immigration bill.
The Home Secretary has made it very clear, and this letter makes it clear, that there is a transition period of up to 3 years after March 2019, when EU nationals can simply turn up and register to stay. And yet you say freedom of movement ends in March 2019. Which is it?
Free movement does end when we leave the European Union. Free movement, by definition, is one of the 4 pillars. As we leave the European Union, that ends. We get control back of our immigration system.
But hang on, these European... My understanding is that up to 3 years afterwards, workers from the European Union can come and simply register, which is not control. They can come and simply register, and in that transition period, which is up to 3 years, they can stay. Is that right?
Well, we have not outlined the detail of what will happen after March 2000. No, she didn't. What we're saying is the Commission will look at, all we've announced today is that the committee, the Migration Advisory Committee, will look at the impact of labour and the European migration on our labour market and our economy here in the UK. That will inform government policies. The government who will set the policy will outline what the framework will be, what the immigration system will be in the immigration bill in 2018. We are very clear. We don't want to have a cliff edge. We want business to be able to continue to grow and develop the system.
You said there'd be no free movement of European workers after March 2019, and yet the Home Secretary is saying there will be a transition arrangements, perhaps up to 3 years, where European Union workers can come here and work. Which is it?
Well, they're actually entirely compatible. The two things go together perfectly well. When we leave the European Union, by definition, freedom of movement ends.
So you'll have
we
to be
have
a visa
control of our borders.
straight after March 2019?
Well, there will be a system after March 2019, which will be our new immigration system, and there will be a period in that, as we said, there will be a transition system, which includes a number of things. For example, which we've already outlined, for EU citizens who are looking to get settled status in the United Kingdom, who have qualified for that. Once we finish that negotiation, there'll be that period for them. There'll be a grace period of 2 years for them to deal with that. We will start saying to people who are coming into this country potentially that they will have to register, so we know who is here.
Yeah, but that's, you know they will register, but that's not controlling them. If this committee identifies a need for workers, say 200,000 on various skills, will you accept that advice?
Well, I'm not going to prejudge what the advisory committee will do. They're an independent committee. They'll give us interim reports. They will report back in a year, and we'll look at what they outline. But what they'll also be looking at is what industry needs in terms of the proportion of workers that it needs.
If it is 200,000, if that's their advice, if it's 200,000, are you going to say that's not acceptable?
Ultimately, the decision on policy is a matter for the government. We'll outline that in the immigration bill next year.
In this letter, there's absolutely no mention of keeping immigration to tens of thousands, or even that as an aspiration or a target. It wasn't even mentioned, and yet that's manifesto commitments.
Yes, that is a manifesto commitment, and we've stuck to that. We're very clear about that. We're the only party saying we do understand that people in this country do want to see us having control of our borders, seeing us reduce migration down to net migration levels down to sustainable levels, and we are still very determined to deliver that. But we want to make sure we do it in a way that still allows our economy to flourish. And we believe you can do both.
But how do you know you can do both? The HR Director of Brexit said to the House of Lords, 1 in 50 applicants is British, 65% of our workers are EU nationals. You will need low-skilled workers. Will they be able to come?
We need to make sure we are developing the skills and the talent that we need in this country for the future, while still being able to tap the brightest and the best, not just from the EU, but from around the world.
But it's not the brightest and best necessarily. This is not to demean people, but people want workers to work in food processing factories, distribution points, hotels, baristas. Those are the kind of low-skilled workers that we do not have, and are you going to train people to be low-skilled workers?
Well, actually, one of the things we need to make sure we're doing, that's why it's important this goes in line with our industrial strategy, is how we make sure that we are getting the best opportunity for people right across our economy here in the UK. We can deliver reducing net migration down to tens of thousands, those sustainable levels we said we want to achieve, while still making sure we have an economy that is thriving and seeing growth for our country.
What kind of economy are we talking about here? Do you mean you believe in a centrally planned economy? This is some kind of GOS plan that you know exactly what's going to happen. You want 3,000 BMW workers, you want 500 hairdressers. The point is you don't know, and you may be short of these people.
Well, it's why it's important we do have an immigration and migration policy that has the flexibility to be able to deliver for our economy. That's why we're doing two things. It's why we're talking to different sectors, as I did with the financial industry just today, and it's why we are getting these experts to have a look at our economy. I'm not going to prejudge and outline today what our immigration policy will be. That will be a matter for the immigration bill in 2018.
Our political editor, Nick Watt, is with me now. What have you learned today?
Well, it's interesting. Your first question to Brandon Lewis is, why didn't you commission this a year ago? And by commissioning it today, it's on a very tight timetable. I understand that Amber Rudd was keen to get going on this project some time ago, before the general election. Obviously, that didn't happen. And as I understand it, Amber Rudd has found it much easier to get approval from this after the changes that took place in Downing Street after the general election result. Important to say, preparatory work has been ongoing on this on the Home Office for quite some time. And it's interesting that Amber Rudd is one of a trio of cabinet ministers who've been pushing for a more relaxed position on immigration to avoid what they're describing as the cliff edge Brexit. No surprise Philip Hammond is in that group, but interestingly, David Davis, the Brexit secretary, he's in that group. He got into trouble with Downing Street late last year when he went beyond the agreed script on immigration, which is the UK must attract the best and the brightest after Brexit. He said we need an immigration policy that will avoid creating shortages in the labour market. Not happy in number 10 when he said that.
Nick, thanks very much indeed. Well, if the government seems to be at 6s and 7s over Brexit, they're not alone. Jeremy Corbyn and the Shadow Secretary of State for International Trade have put the clear message out on the airwaves and in print over the last few days that Labour backs an end to the single market and says no to a customs union. But last night, the Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, seemed to contradict his leader, saying that Labour was not ruling out membership of the single market at all. Earlier, I met up with the Shadow Home Secretary, Diane Abbott. I first asked her for her reaction to today's government announcement on immigration.
The government's in a mess about immigration. They were happy to pander to UKIP voters during the general election, but belatedly now they have realised the very vital role that EU migrants play in the economy. I'm glad that they're going to get some expert advice. I don't understand that they're seeking the expert advice a year after we voted to come out of the European Union, but some facts will be better than urban myths, and some light will be better than the heat which is sometimes generated by immigration issues.
So let's look then at Labour's position, because Barry Gardiner, the Shadow International Trade Secretary, wrote in The Guardian that Labour's position is out of the single market, out of the customs union because you'll be a vassal state, and that actually what we need is a bespoke agreement. Is that your view?
The Labour Party made it very clear in its manifesto that it wants a Brexit which puts jobs and the economy first, and we are not at this stage taking any options off the table.
But Barry Gardiner seemed to suggest that actually out of the single market, out of the customs union will be best for Britain.
He may have seemed to suggest that, but at this point we are not taking options off the table. We believe in looking at where we want to go, and what we want from these negotiations, where we're conducting them, is to have the benefits of being in the single market and being in the customs union. We're about looking at ends, not structures.
So in fact, your view is that we could still be in the customs union?
My view is that we shouldn't take options off the table. This is Britain's future. This is our children's future. It would be irresponsible to take options off the table.
Jeremy Corbyn said on Sunday the benefits of the single market are dependent on membership of the EU, making it quite clear that he believes we should be out the single market.
I was with Jeremy Corbyn this afternoon, and he's quite clear. We're not taking options off the table. There will be no bigger or more important negotiation in my political lifetime. It would be foolish at this stage to take options off the table.
But he said we should be out the single market. He made it perfectly clear. Andrew Marr pressed him on it, and that's what he said.
What we're saying is that when we come out of the single market, freedom of movement will obviously fall. But we're not taking options off the table.
Are you sure that Jeremy Corbyn voted to remain?
Absolutely sure.
Has he told you that?
That's an absurd question. It's almost trying to undermine all the hard work he did and all of us did to try and get the right result.
But if you have the Labour leader saying that he wants to leave the single market, that is the option. If you've got your shadow international trade secretary saying leave the single market, leave the customs union, that looks like Labour is actually supporting a hard Brexit, and there is very little evidence to show that Labour is doing anything to stop a hard Brexit.
You will see what we're doing to stop a hard Brexit when Parliament returns.
Like what?
But I can assure you that our vision for this country going forward is very different from the view of Theresa May and the people around her.
Diane Abbott, thank you very much.